if you try to do everything, you won't do everything well. And therefore, I'm trying to bring a disproportionate energy and focus on child welfare.
Alex, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming in, especially on a Friday morning. You are the director of health and welfare. You worked on the budget with the governor before this. Health and welfare is one of those departments that is really being brought into the center of people's attention. It accounts for a gigantic portion of our budget. That portion that health and welfare is drawing on is increasing. There's a lot going on here. So why don't we just start with, talk to me about the number of federal programs or assistance programs that health and welfare delivers to Idaho residents.
Sure. Well, let me just start by giving you kind of an overview of the agency as a whole. It is our largest state agency. It's got about 3,000 folks that work there. It's got 40 field offices across the state. It runs, mental health hospitals. It runs intermediate care facilities. It, the scope of it is so broad. I've been on the job for about 2 months, and every day I've driven home and said, oh, I didn't know the department did that. Did you know the department regulates public swimming pools? Did you know the department is the agency that repatriates Idahoans back to the United States if there's an incident abroad? Did you know we're the agency that processes food stamps and TANF? We run child protection. We run the public health laboratories. We run vital stats, so birth certificates, death certificates. Every day is a learning experience. However, to your point, federal programs are the largest driver of our $5.5 billion budget. Most people are familiar with Medicaid, which is a healthcare program for the needy. Food stamps, TANF, which is cash assistance for the needy. And then there's a long tail of other programs. I think our high water mark was around 160 federal grants in a year, and it's tapered off post-COVID, but I think we're still around like 120 different federal grants.
And that's money that Idaho, obviously to get grants, Idaho has to apply, but then that we're drawing on federal dollars. Where are those dollars being spent?
Well, a lot of the programs we just talked about, the largest budget driver is Medicaid. It's,
Gotcha.
Historically been above 80% of our budget. I think 86% of our budget was the high water mark year. But it's rippling throughout the economy through transfers to individuals. And it's not lost on me the number of federal grants that we get. It's not lost on me the amount of paperwork that we produce each year, just submitting state plans and state plan amendments and waivers and quarterly and annual reports to the federal government. We are literally spending thousands of hours of staff time on federal grants, and that's something that I'm trying to spend I'm trying to study and rein in. So one of the first actions I took was commissioning a study of all our federal grants, the paperwork burden, and the federal regulations that we're importing as a result of those. And I've generally communicated to the staff that because of the wide scope of our agency, I want to start narrowing our focus to the things that matter the most. Maybe we don't need every $300,000 oral health grant that the feds dance in front of us. Maybe we don't need every $600,000 grant for trail maintenance for the social determinants of health. Let's focus on doing a couple big things well versus a bunch of small things not so well.
So talking about these little grants, you guys are literally going after things like, hey, let's spend time and energy and staff resources on going after a $300,000 grant, potentially for just oral health for people in general or a specific subset of the population.
And it's not to say that those grants aren't important. What I'm
Sure.
The new philosophy I'm bringing, and I'll reiterate, I've been on the job 2 months and trying to inject some change into a culture. But what I'm trying to do is let's focus on the big things. And the big things for me, child welfare and foster care, adoption, youth protection, trying to reorganize the department around child and youth services in particular. With that, it requires us to ask some questions. Just because we've always done something, does that mean we're the right entity to do it moving forward? Some states have this health in all approach where, if anything is remotely connected to healthcare, they bring it under their Department of Health and Welfare equivalent. So you have some states where departments of health are getting into housing. They're getting into outdoor recreation and trail maintenance, because what better way to improve health than outdoor recreation? Well, we have a Department of Parks and Rec for that. We have a Department of Lands for that. So a lot of the approach that I brought in my 2 months is kind of being that annoying person who asks, why? Why are we doing this?
Right.
Do we need to keep doing this? Are we the best positioned entity to do this? And, I listed off some of the functions of what we do earlier, and that's not even scratching the surface of all of the things that we do. I mean, we partner with public health districts on food inspections. We run the public health laboratories, and on and on and on. And if you try to do everything, you won't do everything well. And therefore, I'm trying to bring a disproportionate energy and focus on child welfare.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
I want to hear about this because especially I was talking to Representative Vander Wouda. There we go. That last part's difficult for me. So Vander Wouda. And this is a big thing because Idaho has taken a very specific position on abortion laws, and I'm not interested in, debating that. Plenty of people already are. But that does necessarily affect children. It absolutely affects children. It affects the number of children born in this state. It affects the families that may have otherwise felt they weren't capable of raising children. And my family, for instance, my dad adopted 7 kids after me, and he was big. Also fostered several. I have a partner in a parent tech safety advocacy and education program, Officer Gomez, and he also lives in the area. He also fosters lots of kids. The old adage of it takes a village ties back into contemporary policy, which is, hey, look, if we are going to take a moral position and apply that moral position to policy, which has results in potentially additional children in the state, we also theoretically, just in general, have an obligation to provide some health and welfare for those children, be it adoption or foster, whatever it might be. And just a small point on your trails. I actually recently interviewed one of the board members for the Idaho Trails Association. Incredible individual, by the way, incredible program. They have immersion programs. They're maintaining trails. They're doing all kinds of different things. But the thing I love about Idaho in particular is you still have the opportunity to have individual citizen engagement, right? So people saw a need, they saw a problem, they wanted to provide this thing, and they made an organization to actually affect that thing. Not related to the state. It's not like they're saying, hey, bring us on as full-time employees with health and welfare. They're saying, hey, we need to figure out a way to engage in this. And, people get funding through grants and stuff. But I mean, he's one of, I think, 9 different board members that are, volunteering their time, obviously, and engaging in improving these access ports for people to be in recreational areas.
And you're exactly right. What I would say is nothing I've said should be perceived as criticism of the intended outcome of those programs. It's whether or not we're the right entity to lead on them.
Right.
Are there agencies, are there associations, absolutely. Are there private individuals?
Right.
And you're going to see us pivot to a lot more public-private partnerships, a lot more community partnerships. I've actually set up a division of community and family partnerships to start leveraging the strengths of our private sector and nonprofit sector a little bit more, rather than starting with the presumption that the government agency should take on one more duty.
I love that. And again, I did not mean to present that as a criticism, but just to say, hey, look, I agree with you. You're saying, hey, look, we can't say anything related to public health. Like, let's say, look, I'm going to the movies today. We're going to go see like Moana 2 or, like some other, or Inside Out 2 or whatever it is, right? And like, I'm going to be happy going to see that with my kid. Well, that's probably going to increase my mental health. It's going to increase but the state of Idaho can't get involved with if we gave everybody free movie tickets, we might actually make them happier and improve their mental health. Like, let's go ahead, like Lux, give me 100,000 movie tickets. It doesn't work that way, right? Like at some point you have to cut off other things that are either giving you less return or just less viable in the long run. So I appreciate that. Talk to me about your primary concerns. Let's just start with adoption and foster care.
Yeah, well, I started talking to the governor about this role a couple months, before I started. So it gave me time to prepare and decide where I wanted to spend my disproportionate time and energy. And the more I read legislative oversight committee reports and hearings on the child welfare system, the more I said, this is where we can make our biggest long-term return on investment. So my first day at the department was June 5th. And before I poured my first cup of coffee, I showed up to the office and I signed a temporary rule waiving every adoption fee through the department in the state. We have about 1,400 kids in foster care who need safe, permanent, loving homes. Certainly the goal is reunification with the biological family. That happens in some cases, not all cases. For those cases where it's not appropriate, we need safe, stable, loving, nurturing, permanent adoption homes. What I didn't want to do is have the department be a barrier. We used to charge fees for applications. We used to charge fee for home studies so that we could license families as prospective adoption families. So this is stupid. Let's make this as easy as possible. That doesn't mean we're going to round corners. That doesn't mean we're going to not make sure that candidates are suitable parents for adoption. What it means is we're not going to let cost deter anyone from applying.
That's beautiful, by the way. I so appreciate that. And I can tell you, again, I have not adopted children. I have not fostered children, but I did watch my dad and his wife go through this process with many people. And some of the children that they anticipated they were going to be adopting that had been living with them were reunified with their family. It was wonderful. You're reunified with your biological family. Wonderful. That's also heartbreaking for a family that had anticipated that you were going to become a permanent piece of their life story. These are really, really difficult things to engage in and heartbreaking for a lot of people. And it's a terrible situation in the first place, right? Like people aren't put into foster care or put up for adoption because everything is hunky-dory with everyone involved, right? So the idea that you have to willingly walk into this just inferno of pain and heartache and difficulty. And by the way, you owe us that fee. It's like insult to injury. So kudos to you. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. And, you talk with agency staff, if I waive these, what are the potential downsides? Well, what if we have so many people coming to us asking for home studies that we need additional staff? Great. I'll stand in front of the legislature and ask for those additional staff. I'll go out and I'll do some of the home studies myself. I would file that in the annals of good problems to have. Since I've started in 2 months, I've probably signed 20 to 30 adoption consents. It is one of the things that comes to the director's desk, and it has a summary of the case. And I mean, these are wild rides. I mean, as you said, nobody comes into the foster care system through productive circumstances.
Right.
So reading about these children's journey, but knowing that it has a happy ending, it's culminating in adoption with a loving family, a family that has chosen them. It's like going to a movie knowing that there's a happy ending on the brink, but reading the story is a tearjerker. And I've read every single one of them, and I've sent a handwritten note to every single one of these families that has stepped up. I mean, we're glad that they found these children. We're glad that they opened their homes to them, and certainly wishing for their best success.
And there is support for, let's just focus on adoption. There is support for families that do elect to, open their home and open their hearts to adopted children, right? And is my understanding from talking to Rep. Vanderwoode that support, financial support for them, for instance, got extended from 18 to, I believe, 21. Is that accurate?
So foster care payments,
foster care, not adoption,
did go from 18 to 21. There is adoption assistance for families that need it. Adoption assistance is a little bit rarer than foster care assistance, but it is available to families that need it. Certainly, we'll pivot to foster care a little bit since you brought it up. When someone comes into foster care, just round numbers, we have about 1,400 kids in foster care right now. We have about 1,100 families to care for them. So we have more kids than families. That's not uncommon. That's what happens in most states. We want to be a state that has more families than kids. We want families waiting for kids to be placed in their home. We don't want kids waiting on families. So one of the big priorities we're going to have is trying to cast a wider net and bring more foster families into our system. Our mantra is right kid, right place, right time. The right place for most kids at the right time is in a family home environment. Replicates a traditional family, the traditional bonding. There's trauma with anyone placed in foster care, but you can minimize that the more you replicate a family setting and a family structure. If we do not have enough families for kids, then the next option is congregate care, group homes, short-term rentals with multiple children, not as stable of a family environment and generally worse outcomes. Congregate care is something that's always going to be necessary. Chances are you don't want to put the 6'5" teenage sex offender in a traditional family home, but you want to minimize the amount of children that you're placing in congregate care. To do that, we need more families willing to step up, willing to open their homes to them. So we've tried to take a number of actions. My second day on the job, we had a board meeting, and I ran through a slate of rule changes to reduce some of the red tape and friction in the foster licensing process. In 2019, the Trump administration, for example, had adopted model licensing requirements that they were promoting to states. Idaho had many regulations that exceeded the national model. Just a couple examples. Our minimum age to foster was higher than the national. We had all this red tape around fencing. You must have a 4-foot fence around any body of water. Makes sense for swimming pools or hot tubs, I guess. But in rural Idaho, how many 4-foot fences have you seen the duration of an irrigation, canal?
Yeah, right.
Probably not a lot. So, was that a barrier to getting rural families signed up? And some of those in our non-urban communities. So we got rid of quite a bit of the red tape. Those took effect July 1. July was our top month for foster recruitment in the last 3 years. We had more foster families sign up in July than any month in the last 3 years. And it shows, you get rid of some of that regulatory friction and families follow. We also had, some relatively subjective foster licensing requirements that we got rid of. So just as one example, we used to have this requirement that, we would send out a social worker from the department, and they had to make a judgment about whether or not the couple that wanted to foster had a quote unquote harmonious home life. Well, I was reading through a lot of these regulations, prior to my start, and to mentally refresh. My wife and I went to Alaska just to get some peace and quiet before starting the new job. And depending on where we were in the wilderness and where we were in hiking, we may or may not have had a harmonious home life. So some of these things are judgments that you don't necessarily want government bureaucrats making. You want to have a very objective process.
If I may ask, where in Alaska did you go to hike?
So my wife teaches at Idaho State University, and they have a branch campus in Anchorage. So we get to go up to Anchorage several times a year, and then down to Alyeska, which is like the ski resort.
Yeah.
So
my dad lived in Anchorage for 25 years. He just moved. He actually just moved to this neighborhood like a year ago. I would not call hiking in Alaska harmonious at all. Like, you have mosquitoes the size of your hand. I was there over summer in college, and doing this, I was out on a trail, fire trail, not far from like the houses right in town, maybe like a mile, and I got stuck in this little mud patch. These the off-road fire trails in Alaska, weather's all over the place. So I get stuck, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just get off my bike. And literally within 2 seconds, my arm is black with bugs, and I'm like, and I start panicking. So I try to like jump on my bike, and I fall over because the tires are still stuck. And it got so bad. And this is me at 20, right? I literally pick up my bike and start running down the trail to like get out of the mud and to avoid the mosquitoes. So I don't know what you were hoping for, but Like,
I'll say one of the mornings my wife was teaching, and I did a hike on a mountain. I forget the name of it. And it was one where, I mean, it was almost all snowed over. Started early enough, got up fine. Coming back, the sun melted it just enough. You'd take a step,
my God,
sink 2 feet. You'd take a step, sink 2 feet. And I said, my God, I hope this isn't a metaphor for what I'm about to walk into at DHW.
well, it's not a metaphor. Yeah. And again, it's beautiful up there, but it is, I think that's actually a really fair point, which is kind of like, look, this is hiking up there really is like life with a wife or a spouse and kids. It's just a train wreck, right? Like it's like everything seems fine. Like I have this, I have 3 little boys, and it's funny because they wake up in the morning and I'm drinking my cup of coffee and they're like the sweetest, nicest kids ever. I'm like, this is great. They come give you hugs and give you a kiss, and you check out my little Lego thing. And I actually started telling them, I'm like, I love this, but you and I both know in about 10 hours, 11 hours, it's going to be a train wreck. Like, can we just hold on to this right here? And like, sure enough, like 6 o'clock rolls around. Everybody's exhausted after dinner. They're screaming over, who has the Lego motorcycle guy. And it's like, oh my gosh. But okay, so eliminating those subjective kind of barriers where people, take a glimpse into somebody's life at a specific time and make some judgment call or determination that, oh, this is what this house is. It's not harmonious. This is not a good setup. Yeah. That's a bad idea.
So, reducing the red tape, reducing the regulatory friction, it paid off. So, like I said, if you look at, let's talk math. If you look at the number of families that we have fostering divided by the number of kids, you want that number to be above 1. You want more families available to open their homes to these kids than you have kids coming into the foster care system. When I started, our number was 0.74. We only had 0.74 families per every kid.
So that's, if you have 1,000 kids that are needing foster care, you have 740 families available.
Yeah, so we've grown that. I mean, it's grown darn near every week with some of the actions we've taken to 0.08. So it's trending in the right direction, and that's because we've prevented some kids coming into the system safely through effective diversion, and then we've also recruited more foster families, as I talked about. But it's going to take time. It's going to take culture shifts, and it's going to take a lot more action. So I'll give you a couple more examples. Just this week, Governor Little announced the state's paid family leave policy is going to extend to foster families. Right now, it only applied for birth or adoption. So if you're a state employee and you sign up to be a foster parent and you get a placement, you get paid family leave to the same extent you would for birth or adoption. Why that's important is oftentimes there's trauma involved when a child is pulled from a biological home and enters in the foster care system. It takes time for the foster family to bond with that child and stabilize the placement. So having time off. We also ask a lot of foster families. That's why it's not for everybody. There's ongoing visitation. There's ongoing caseworker visits. There's court appearances. And if you're asking a state employee to take that on, and not compensating them for that time, and you're asking them to use their own vacation or their sick time or unpaid time off, it's little surprise why many would not sign up. So
that's wonderful, by the way. Like, that's great that they're at least excuse me, at least for state employees. That's great.
And what was awesome, and this is one of the reasons I love working with Governor Little, is he also shares that community partnership. Let's work with the private sector mindset. With his announcement, he was joined by executives from both St. Luke's Health System and Western States Equipment, who announced that their paid leave policies will also extend to fosters. So, what one of the levers available to the department is, just how many private sector organizations we touch. Most grocery stores, most gas stations enroll in SNAP, for example. Every is an overstatement. Most health systems, most primary care and urgent care facilities are enrolled in Medicaid. We have 2,700 contracts. So naturally, a lot of private businesses are in and out of our offices. And one of the questions we're asking all of them when they come in is, hey, does your paid family leave policy for your company extend to fostering? If not, do you mind taking a look at it? So certainly any of the businesses watching today, I would encourage them to look at whether or not their paid family leave policy for their existing employees extends to fostering. And if not, why not? And certainly happy to have a conversation with them about whether or not it makes sense to change that. One of the other things we did, I mean, bringing new foster families into the system is critical. Retaining the existing foster families we have is frankly even more important. There's a lot of good people in the system who haven't felt like the department has communicated with them as effectively as they need. They often get kids, they often get a call in the middle of the night saying, "Hey, I've got a 4-year-old. Would you be willing to take them on?" And didn't feel like they got all the information. They didn't know if they had a peanut butter and jelly allergy. They didn't know if they had any medications that were needed or if there were any medication allergies. So a couple things that we're doing to try to improve communication with existing foster families. We released a new Foster Family Bill of Rights. It took effect August 1st, and it sets clear expectations for how our caseworkers and case managers will work with foster families, involve them in case planning, open communication. We also had a rule that we had take effect this week. We literally had a rule that spoke about minimum transparency in foster care cases. I deleted the word minimum and substituted the word maximum. We're going to provide the maximum amount of information allowable under the law to foster families so that they can take care of these children the way they need to be taken care of. So, I mean, improving communication, improving that relationship, and then just showing that we care and showing that we appreciate them. So I'll give you just a couple examples. Earlier this week, we announced a partnership where we're providing a free park pass for every foster family. Do I think that's radically going to change the trajectory of any foster child's life? It's one of those things. It demonstrates we care, we appreciate them, we respect them, we hear them, we see them, but it gives them now a chance to do some of those outdoor recreation things that does create family bonding times and replicates a traditional family. What was really cool about that is it was a public-private partnership. So we're providing free park passes and free adventure days where each of the parks will host a day for foster families where they'll teach them some of those basic life skills, how to start a fire, how to do Dutch oven cooking, how to back up a trailer. Hell, I see a lot of parents, a lot of California transplants around here who would benefit from some of those trainings.
God, you cut me deep.
But, the cost of the taxpayers, $0.00. Why? Because Regents Blue Shield of Idaho and Idaho Businesses for Outdoor Rec stepped up and said, we want to be a part of that. We want to do something for foster care. We want to help these families. We want to help these children. This is core to our values, and they wrote the check to do that. So you're going to see a lot more of those public-private partnerships moving forward.
That's beautiful, man. One thing that I've been wanting to point out as well, a couple minutes ago, you mentioned, hey, look, it's not always the best option to have, like a 6'5" teen going into every single foster house, depending on the circumstances. Most people don't realize you can have your own parameters for what type of children you're interested in fostering. And Kate with Foster and Heart, who I interviewed, she indicated that she had some very specific requirements when she started fostering children. She's a single woman, and I don't remember exactly all of the specifics, but I think she was saying, I won't speak for her, but say I'm a single dude. I'm like, all right, I don't want to foster a 16-year-old girl. Right? I think if I were a single guy and I was trying to foster people, I think that would be a pretty good requirement for me in particular. And I have the ability to do that, which is, hey, if you have a 16-year-old girl, I hope she finds the right placement. But as a single guy with like the only person in the house, I don't want to have a 16-year-old girl who I don't know and I'm unrelated to. It's just whatever. But if you have like a 2-year-old, I'm all in or something like that. People can set up what they're comfortable with and work within that kind of parameter so that they know that they're getting the best placement. They don't have additional concerns or hesitations or barriers with getting foster children.
That's exactly right. I mean, the department works with foster families, understands what their preference is, and then as children come into the system, tries to match the preferences with the foster family. Foster family always has veto authority if your circumstances have changed and you're not at a position where you can take on this child, or let's say you said you were interested in 0 to 4 and we have a 6-year-old and we say, hey, no, you said 0 to 4, but we've got a 6-year-old. You still retain the ability to say no. Right. I will say in general, It's not uncommon to find foster families who want the 0 to 4 year olds. Where we have the biggest struggle placing, it's the children over the age of 9. The older the child, the harder it is to place. And those with sibling groups. Oftentimes, when people come into the foster care system, it's a sibling group of 3, 4, 5. For their benefit, you try to keep sibling groups together, and it's very hard to find families, as you might imagine, that are willing to accommodate a sibling group of that size. So you're 100% right. The foster family retains that final decision-making authority and to accept or not. But where we have the biggest need, I would generally say, is children over 9 and sibling groups.
Right. And there are, again, Foster and Heart is specifically designed for sibling groups, but there are not, you don't have those organizations like on every street corner, right? And like if you have somebody with as Kate did, had a sibling group of 5, it's like, that's an astronomical ask to have a family absorb. I mean, even if I have a couple kids, like I have 3 kids, if we went from 3 kids to 8 kids overnight, like it would just be a huge thing. So yeah, I understand. And there are opportunities for people to, if somebody has a big heart and they're like, hey, I would like to start an organization, there are opportunities, and the state does assist with those types of things, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that was important to me, as I said, we took what used to be a lot of disparate programs and organized a new wing of our department called Children, Youth, and Family Services. And then we broke it up into 3 divisions. One of the divisions that we organized is called the Division of Community and Family Partnerships. Because one of the things we're finding is there are a lot of Idahoans with big hearts and want to help. How do we bring all of them together? We've got a group, for example, it's called the Idaho Freedom Youth Foundation. And the Freedom Youth Foundation founder lives here in Eagle. Former college basketball player, brings foster kids together through sport. They'll organize events at Top Golf. They'll organize events at soccer fields so that these kids can come together, feel part of a community, learn leadership skills, work together. And how do you channel all of these efforts into something much bigger than any of the individual groups could do? We don't want government to play a role that these nonprofits and private organizations can do, but how can we augment what they're doing so that we can extend their reach and make them even more effective? That's
great, man. I mean, it's, again, coming back to the old adage, it takes a village. And if people in this state, which is a very proud, independent state, do feel that, hey, the government is not the answer, then it's like, okay, well, then we, the people, have to be the answer, right? Like we have these problems. It's not good enough to say, get the government out without potentially at least trying to at least step up in some way and supply a solution for it. So that's foster care, right? And we're touching on adoption. What are other aspects of child welfare that the health and welfare really goes after? Because I mean, obviously I do a lot of work with tech safety. It's really scary to me, the nature of our children being integrated into technological devices in really young ages. I mean, you see 6, 7, 8-year-olds just swiping away on phones or tablets of some nature. My family got sucked into that personally over COVID, obviously. We were not a tech family. Our kids didn't play video games. Yeah, we watched like movies and stuff, but over COVID, obviously, it's like, oh no, everybody has an iPad. Everybody's on a screen, and you're on a screen for hours and hours a day. And that became normalized over that time frame, which was horrific, because once we took a step back from it, last year, we had obviously been here for a while, and our kids had the screens and tech in our house had just become normalized over that time frame. All of a sudden, we're like, oh my God, what are we doing? This is hell. Like, this is terrible. The amount of apps that our kids wanted to download, even if they were free, then you're running these like insane ads. You can't monitor everything. It was a train wreck. And the anxiety and chaos it brought just in our house outside of social media. These were just, like free iPad games. Terrible. And games like Roblox have a long, rich history of being predator friendly and predator, and victim rich target zones for predators in general. These are things that are affecting youth at an alarming rate. Representative Cook obviously tried to bring a bill during last session to curb or at least augment how consumer devices are sold in the state of Idaho, which is to assume that they're being sold to a minor unless you indicate otherwise, or there was a toggle button that he turned on essentially. That got squashed. that got destroyed by the tech industry, right? Like you had people descending from across the country to make comment against that bill. And it's like, why do people care about like a 2 million person state who just wants to toggle on like a minor's using this device switch on a phone? And that's what happened. The tech industry does not want it. That's really scary to me, right? Because it affects the health and welfare of our children. Is this something that the health and welfare department is dealing with, or is it more of like, hey, tangential, we have, mental health resources. We're not targeting specifically like tech problems.
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. So we have a children's mental health program that helps connect youth to services in need, irrespective of cause or purported cause. Sure. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to believe that the issues related to tech are causing anxiety, behavioral health issues, mental health issues. Regardless of the cause, we have services both through Medicaid and outside of Medicaid on a sliding fee scale. Medicaid's one of the largest, if not the largest, health insurer for children in the state. And we help subsidize the youth crisis centers, where if somebody needs 24 hours less of care, but to help stabilize, certainly would encourage folks to look into the youth crisis centers throughout the state as well.
Gotcha. And are those crisis centers in predominantly like the major metropolitan areas?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So we have one here in Boise, but it's intended for short term, less than 24 hours, quick stabilization to help stabilize, and then assess if longer term care is needed.
Gotcha. This is a lot, obviously, right? And this is predominantly what we've been focusing on is youth, right? How do we support and help youth within the state? Are there issues that Idaho is facing, or decisions that Idaho is going to have to make regarding adult care and health and welfare of, not minors?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of these issues are intimately stitched together.
Right.
So, I mean, if you ask me what's driving a lot of entry into foster care, it's adult mental health issues and adult substance use disorder issues. Substance use disorder issues, opioid abuse, other drugs of abuse is one of the leading causes of abuse and neglect of children, and then children entering into the system. So, I mean, having access to services for both mental health and substance use disorders for adults also has ripple effects for our child welfare system. We run Medicaid, as I said. I think the high water mark was 86% of our budget. I think this most recent year, Medicaid, the bill for the state was about $4.2 billion. So to put that in perspective, I mean, once you start talking about numbers in the B's, the billions, people start to just kind of gloss over. Our entire state budget is somewhere between $14 and $15 billion. So, I mean, Medicaid is now the largest driver of the state's budget. I mean, when people think of state government and the role of the state relative to the role of the feds, they most often think education. Education is primary responsibility of the state. It is no longer the largest budgeted item in our state. Health and welfare, specifically Medicaid, is the largest budget driver in our state.
Gosh, man, speaking with Rep. Vanderwoude, he was saying, hey, the Medicaid expansion went from $40 million to $100 million. And they're trying to bring that back down. And I thought that number was a lot. I'm like, $100 million, that's a lot of money. That's 2.5% of what you're talking about. That's a nothing number compared to 4 billion plus.
One of the challenges when you talk about Medicaid, there's kind of braided funding. The state has a contribution they make, and then the feds have a contribution they make. Medicaid expansion was part of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, to try to entice states to expand into this new population. The feds match every dollar the state put in 9-1. So they cover 90% of the bill. We cover 10% of the bill. So when Representative Vanderwoude says that it's $100 million, that's the state's portion of the bill.
Right, because the actual expansion portion went up to $1 billion.
Approximately. So, our role as an executive agency is to enforce the law and implement the law. Policy decisions are made by the legislature. There's rational policy reasons to cover certain populations. There's rational policy reasons to have certain services covered or not covered in Medicaid. My job isn't to make those policy decisions. My job is to implement the policy decisions that have been made. And that is one of the things that you're going to see me be very particular about. We are the most regulated agency. We've got about 1,200 pages of regulations, and many of them are implementing federal grants that don't have a real statutory overlay. So one of the bulletins I signed early on is you're going to see us start taking a lot of things that are in regulation and moving them to statute, working with the legislature to put those in statute. Now you could say, what is the benefit of that? If you're just taking something that exists in rule and moving it to statute, why is that a good use of time? Well, now you're returning it to the elected lawmakers, those who are elected to make policy decisions, and it reduces over time that bureaucratic temptation to maybe let's relax some of these parameters. Let's not require work. Let's give waivers. Let's increase eligibility. And when you remove those from unelected bureaucrats, myself being the primary example, and you restore those to the elected lawmakers, then at least the programs are more reflective of what the general population expects.
Right. And you have more transparency for the general population, right? If something's happening in your office, unelected individuals administering these programs, making these decisions, the general public doesn't see a robust or clear debate about, that they would see if it were in the hands of lawmakers saying, hey, I think we should do this, or I think we should do this. You have discussions and committees and things of that nature.
Yeah, and I don't want that to be seen as criticism of any decision that's been made or has been previously made in the department. It's a different approach that I take. And
right.
I think you're going to see me try to bring some bills, working with the legislature next session to ensconce things in statute so that changes moving forward would be their decision, policy decisions wrestled through the political and policy-making process that does, to your point, invite public comment and has multiple checkpoints to make sure that they get it right.
Awesome. I have one more question. And again, I have no idea about all the things you do. So if there are things you want to hit too, just let me know. But I have one more specific question. A lot of people, especially the populations moving from out of state, and even people that have lived here forever, that observe either through, for instance, social media or in person going down, like, for instance, I had to fly into Oakland recently. Oh my God. Like, it was just so brutal. It's like, kids, stay in the car, like, lock the doors, we're flying. It was everything you see on Instagram or TikTok. Like, it's not exaggerated. It's that bad in specific areas. But one of the big anxieties that people have moving here, myself included, was like, hey, I do not want my kids growing up in an area that overwhelmingly passes policies or have things in place that support and promote homeless populations, essentially taking over our communities. And this is something that I've been dealing with since I was 18. I grew up in a city called Concord, and then I went to Berkeley. I'm not a fan of Berkeley at all. And it doesn't take long to realize why if you ever go to Berkeley and you see people just like the worst, most upsetting aspects of humanity existing on the sidewalk and people not helping them. Right. I have family members that are in the Berkeley Police Department. It's like, you don't understand how difficult it is to do it. Like, we can't even stop people from doing all kinds of drugs, engaging in horrific behavior. Really upsetting. There are problems, though, that exist in other states like California that promote or at least enable this type of behavior. Right? It becomes a subculture that's largely funded by taxpayers with food handouts, with, not housing, for instance, but without asking for them to obtain any kind of level of cleanliness or drug-free state before they get the housing, right? It's just like, give it to all. One story recently that came up was that there was an aspect of the health and welfare in the city of San Francisco, and they were providing alcoholic vagrants with alcohol, because they're like, hey, alcohol withdrawals are bad. That's a health risk. Let's give these guys some alcohol so that they don't have as bad of withdrawals. It's like, okay, that to me, an ignorant individual, seems a little crazy, right? What programs exist through the state that are helping bring people from the worst days of their life, when they're homeless, back into the functional state of contribution in society?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll talk about the main programs we have: medical assistance, so Medicaid; food assistance, so food stamps, SNAP; cash assistance, TANF; and then child care subsidies, things like that. Homeless individuals will qualify for most of those. department doesn't have a lot of housing programs. We do have the Idaho Housing and Finance Association. Then you have individual cities like the city of Boise and Ada County, for example, that have housing authorities that often get federal grants to help homeless people on the housing side. Our programs are on the food, energy assistance, medical assistance, childcare, including for homeless families that have children. So that's where we help. When you look at all of our programs, I think it is important to have a safety net. Governor always talks about having spring in the safety net. Let's make sure the safety net does not become a snare.
Right.
So, I mean, if you look at, and I say this as a broad generality, if you look at generally the 4 ingredients to success for individuals: education, at least high school education, a stable job, marriage, and kids after marriage. As I approach our programs that we're responsible for, making sure that we're not disincentivizing any of those 4 core elements to a generally successful life. That's not to say it works for everybody.
Right.
And that's not to say that you can't be successful if you don't graduate
Correct.
from high school and have a kid
Absolutely.
outside of wedlock, right? Like
Absolutely.
there are plenty of people who can do that. But if you look statistically, you're like, hey, look, driving factors, if you have a high school diploma, if you get married, and if you wait to have kids after you get married, statistically, you have a far lower probability of falling in dire straits.
Absolutely. So, I mean, do any of our welfare programs disincentivize marriage? Do they have penalties or income cliffs? How do we minimize that? How do we ensure that those who can be working, the able-bodied adults of working age, how do we ensure that they are working and that this does not become a snare? Earlier this week, we had 2 federal employees fly in to talk to me about my vision for our food stamps program. And they were lightly nudging, Idaho is one of only 7 states that has a mandatory work requirement for able-bodied adults in food stamps. It would be good if Idaho was not one of those 7 states. And you politely listen, but it's like, I think the legislature kind of has an expectation that those who can work should, because the most effective welfare program long-term in the history of the United States has proven to be a job.
Gosh, man. Thank you for having that conversation with them, because I have a one particular family member who really struggled through his teen years, and then through his early time, he didn't graduate from high school, really struggling. And then as he hit his early 20s, he decided, hey, look, I want to go back to school. And he did. And we had, California has a very good junior college program, so he was able to get his GED pretty quickly. Very bright individual, ends up going to junior college, crushes at the junior college, and this is in his early 20s, then goes to one of the UC schools, and then gets a PhD in computational cognitive neuroscience from an Ivy League school. Incredible individual, right? But struggled wildly through his earlier years. And there was an expectation, there was an understanding eventually when he decided to go back to school, which is like, hey, look, you have the full support of the family, but there are standards and requirements associated with it. It wasn't just here's a blank check, do whatever you want. And in later conversations after, reflecting on this, he very much attributed his success to that standard, which is like, you had to get like a swift kick in the butt. And I've had those experiences too, right? Like my dad, when partway through college, is like, you need to get better grades, or like, I'm not going to support you through college. It's like, yeah, great. Guess what? I got a 4.0 the next semester. Like my dad was not wrong for kicking me in the butt like that. Having that standard, having an expectation, not only in my mind, and I could be wrong, again, I'm a total idiot, but in my mind, in my life experience, it's, hey, that's not only the right thing to do to honor the contribution that people are making, be it in family or taxpayer, but it is sometimes, and it seems to be large time in my mind, the thing that really drives people to honor the contribution and make something of their lives, which in ultimately seeing people that have fallen off the bandwagon and totally, remove themselves from society, even though they exist within society. That's not compassion to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
Like what a bastardization of that concept.
And I mean, one of the things that's important to me as I step in this role is transparency and accountability. These programs are important. They're absolutely necessary for a subset of the population. As I said, you need that safety net. You want there to be spring in it. So every month, 15th business day of the month, so you'll see our August one soon, we're publishing some information on each of these programs. How many folks were on it? What was the average, how much total was spent? What was the average per person spent on each of these programs? And then there's some other measures that are on there that I would contend are success measures. How many people exited the program because their income grew to a level that they no longer needed that program?
God bless that number.
So-
If that number is greater than 0, good job.
It's greater than 0. We're talking single digits, but let's celebrate that.
Yes.
Let's proclaim that as a success, that those individuals grew their income and they're on that path to self-sustainability.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Director, we've talked about a lot of different things today. Is there anything that you want to hit on or anything that we've missed?
Trying to bring focus to a large organization has its learning curves, has its bumps and bruises. But I think generally we're focused on the right target, which is improving child welfare outcome. I don't think there's anything we can do that will have a bigger long-term return on investment for Idaho than focused on our children, specifically those that end up in the foster care system. So I think, just reiterating, if you're if you're in a position where you can open your heart and your home to these children, knowing it's not for everybody, give consideration to that. We need more families than we currently have. If you're not in that position, are there ways that you can help? Can your company offer paid family leave for foster kids? Can you provide respite care for kids so that foster families can have a break when they need it? Or are you in a position somewhere to do a public-private partnership? I mean, we talked about, for example, the parks passes for foster families. Next week, I have like 100 tickets we're giving out to Caldwell Night Rodeo to foster families.
Wow, that's awesome.
You would be stunned how many families are trying to. I have more families wanting tickets than I have tickets available. So just keep things like that in mind. How can we honor these families, give them family bonding experiences and replicate? So just would encourage your listeners to think through what would be a public-private partnership that you could do, even if you're not in a position to foster yourself.
Awesome. Thank you for what you're doing for the state. Thank you for what you're doing for the children of the state and the families of the state. I think kids are the most important thing. And again, you're standing up for them. So thank you for coming in today as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.